Hi, and welcome to Music City listeners. I'm your host, Dewey Boyd, and I wanted to know how people find their place in the music industry. So, I've started asking the best listeners I can find how they did it, or maybe how it happened to them. Join me, won't you? We'll start with a simple, where are you from? And we'll see where this all goes. This is Russ Long. There he is.
Good night.
Good night. So what we tend to do, I'll say what we usually do. We've only done this twice before, but we kind of do this in two segments where the first part, I just ask Russ some questions and just kind of get your story, because a lot of us are kind of at the very early part of our career and are very curious, like how someone continues to do it for more than, without going broke and things like that. Or just continues to find inspiration to do the craft. So I'll kind of ask you a lot of questions to that end, and then we'll take a break and get some food, refill drinks, and then kind of come back and open the floor for Q&A until Russ says it's time to go home, or until I say, like, Russ, we probably should go home. So,
or until we're out of beer.
Or until we're out of beer. So Russ, where are you from?
Well, I'm from Boulder, Colorado. That's where I was born, and lived there till I was, I left Boulder when I was in elementary school and went to Grand Junction, which is a small town in the western half of Colorado, and got into music early on. Started, you want me to go on to tell part of my story, or
just keep going?
Was first a big fan of music, started playing drums, well, just a snare drum in the concert band at school when I was 10, and became pretty passionate about drums throughout middle school and high school, and still being from a smaller town, was the kid that everybody was like, oh, he's great, he could be something if he went somewhere or whatever, and then so I had these aspirations of being a drummer, and there was a little 8-track studio, quarter-inch reel-to-reel 8-track studio in town, and started playing drums on a few things they did there, and then made the move to Nashville when I was 19. I went to college for 2 years in Colorado, a small state school, and still lived with my parents, and then found out about Belmont and made the move to Nashville, and was still excited about drums, but also had some interest in recording and everything, but thought drums might still be the path until I started being around a lot of other people who were the great kid drummer from their small town, and realized that they were all better than me, and being a good drummer in a small town doesn't necessarily translate so well into a big city of amazing musicians. So started to lose some interest in drums because of that, and then also I started playing on a few independent records for people, and went in and played on this project for a guy who was also a student at Belmont, and just remember playing just big and powerful and feeling like, man, these drums are going to be gigantic, and so excited to hear it. And at that point, any independent record, they couldn't afford to print vinyl, so it was a cassette tape. I couldn't wait to get that cassette, and finally got the cassette 2 months later when they had finished it, and put it in, and the drums sounded small and anemic and just terrible, and I was like, what in the world happened? I played big and huge, and they're small and tiny, and quickly came to my senses and realized that the drummer has no control at all about how the drums sound. That's all in somebody else's hands, and so I started getting more and more interested in the sound of the drums and the sound of everything, as opposed to being the guy that played them, and also realized that the guy that plays the drums is usually in for the first 2 or 3 days of a record if he's lucky, and then he's gone and he's done, and that's it, and he doesn't have any more of a thumbprint than that and how the album sounds. But the engineer is the guy who gets called and booked for, at that point, I mean, usually one engineer saw a project through beginning to the end, and you get a call and say, hey, what's your schedule look like from the second week of June to the third week of August or whatever, and you get booked for 8-9 weeks on a project real regularly, and I mean, there might be a long weekend in there here or there where the band had to go do some promo thing or something like that, but generally you'd get booked for a long project, and realize that as the engineer I could really have a strong say in how this project sounded. So that's kind of my loose story on what brought me to town, and how I became interested in engineering rather than drumming.
So did you do any engineering at all before you came to town?
No, I didn't.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I didn't really know anything about it before. So I took classes on it in Belmont when I got to Belmont, and I graduated from there. And I mean, I think still, it seems this is a pretty amazing thing. I mean, even still after doing it for almost 30 years, I mean, I feel like I'm tricking somebody in that this is what I do for a living. I mean, I'm actually doing this, and they're paying me. You know, I mean, I feel like I've got the wool pulled over somebody's eyes, and that they are paying me to make music. You know, which is just the most amazing career ever. But at the end of school, even though I was taking engineering classes in school and getting a music business degree, I still didn't consider it feasible to do this for a living, and I was planning on being a entertainment attorney and going to law school, and I took the LSAT and did okay on the LSAT, and then which I took before my last year of college, and then my last year of college I took 2 law classes, which I both hated and did terrible in, and thankfully that was my last year of college was the one time my parents didn't ask me about my grades, because I went my entire life without ever getting any D's, and I got 2 D's my last semester of college, both in law classes, and just decided that, you know what, there's no chance in hell that I'm going to be an entertainment attorney, and this I had a friend, I remember we had a conversation, and he couldn't believe, I mean, I spent all of my time in the studio, and at that point at Belmont, you could get into the studio at night, and we'd go in at midnight and work till 6 in the morning, and I mean, do that multiple days a week, and there weren't all that many students there, so there was a lot of available time, and that's all I cared about was recording and mixing music, and my friend was like, what are you checking into law schools for? I was like, well, you know, I got to have a job or whatever, and it wasn't until then, he's like, man, this is what you do, you record music, and I was like, well, maybe I could do that, you know, and talked to my parents about it, and they weren't too keen on the idea, and I think they were like, okay, we'll give him a chance, and as soon as he comes asking for money, we'll let him know it's time to get a job. And I was determined I'm not going to ask my parents for money, because I'm going to make this work.
Wow. Did your parents have any kind of musical background at all, or?
My mom was really good at playing the FM radio, and my dad could play some pretty mean vinyl, but outside of that, no, we grew up we had a piano in the house, and I had piano lessons too from an early age, and my brother and my sister are both really good musicians, far better than I ever was. They both play the piano. They both my brother has a minor in piano from college, and my sister her major was music, and
oh wow.
So, I mean, we were around music a lot, but there was no, I mean, I never knew anything about recording or that whole aspect of things, you know, outside of having a cassette deck that you push play and record on to record the concert, the band concert at school or whatever. Yeah.
So walk me through how that transition happened, where so you had that session and you had the experience of getting the tape. So then what was your access to, what was the gateway into getting into recording from that? Like, what was the opportunity you had to
I was already taking classes at Belmont. Okay, I was already taking recording classes, because that was part of the, so I was learning about it and was doing, I mean, I don't remember if I'd done a class project yet at that point, but I was interested in the studio and the whole idea of I mean, as a drummer, I became more interested in being, I thought, well, I want to be a studio drummer. I don't want to be a live drummer. I want to go make records. I don't want to play shows. So I had an interest in the studio already, but then had an interest in production too. I mean, you don't know, it's much easier for you guys to know kind of the behind the scenes things, because there's so many, I mean, like every DVD has a documentary and a behind the scenes look at things, and there's all kinds of great music documentaries about the making of great albums and all this, but there was no streaming shows. There was none of that when I was growing up. It was the whole mystery. I mean, I remember I read the credits for every record I ever bought, and half of it was a mystery on what all these people did and what was going on. I mean, I had no idea. It just sounded awfully exciting, and I liked listening to records a lot. So, and I played drums, so at that point I wanted to play drums, you know?
Yeah. So then when you worked your way out of Belmont and out of law school, then what was the next step after that? So
well, I was already, because Nashville was at that point considered a lot more of a I mean, really feel like we've got a great city, and it's a music city, and people think of it as music city, you know, and we've got rock, and we've got R&B, and we've got, of course, country, and we've got roots rock, and we've got singer-songwriter, and we've got folk, and all this stuff, and it feels like a pretty diverse city now, but it really felt like a country city that had some other stuff at that point. It felt like a country music city, and country music has always been the one flavor of music that I'm not too fond of. So the idea of staying in Nashville was never very appealing to me. So my whole plan was, once I get through Belmont, I'll move to either New York or LA, because that's where I did read enough of the credits to know that the records I liked the most were either made in New York or LA. So that's where I wanted to go. But my last year of college, I started doing demos for a couple different publishers, and was making enough money when I graduated to and doing enough projects on the side, and I was able to bring projects into Belmont, which I know was against the rules, but we could bring bands in there and record, and you would charge the band $150 or whatever to record from midnight to 7 in the morning, and I didn't have to give anything to the school. I booked like a project, so I made $150, which I was thrilled to make $150 in a night, and I did that all the time. But I was making enough money to stay alive when I got out of school. So the idea of I was afraid to move to LA or New York, because I didn't want to feel like I was going to a place where I didn't know a soul.
Right.
And I was making a living here. I mean, not a good living. My first year out of school, I wanted so bad to break the 10,000 mark, and I didn't quite make it. I think I made like $9,980 or something in the year. But at the same time, that was enough money to pay. I didn't have a car payment. Just had rent, and there were plenty of weeks where I bought a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter and a jar of honey, and that was enough, you know. But I did that from the get-go. I never waited tables. I never did anything else except for music. So I was pretty excited about that.
Yeah. Wow. So with that, did you start like assisting other people, or did you kind of just dive?
I kind of dove in, which was, I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing or not, because you learn a lot from assisting. But I was first engineering, but at a much lower level, because there was a lot of demos and stuff. Yeah. And when I say, I wasn't only engineering. There was other stuff. Making pitch tapes for publishing companies was a big deal back then too. Now it's all people email MP3s and it's no big deal. But back then, you had a publisher was going to bring a cassette to somebody to try to get the songs cut on an album, and there was the same way there's a loudness war now. You wanted to record the song as loud as you could on the cassette without it distorting, because if the if the producer of the album's going through listening to a bunch of different tapes, you wanted yours to pop a little more so it was recorded a little louder. So in cassette decks, they had a bias on them and record levels, and it was not just a simple play and record. There was the studio cassette decks had some control, and you could definitely screw it up. So they didn't have their regular publishing company interns did it. They had an engineer person. They thought it was worth paying somebody $8 an hour to make cassette tapes. And the other thing was putting, you wanted to make sure the song started real close at the beginning. So there's a leader at the beginning of every cassette tape, and you wanted the song to start immediately. You didn't want there to be too much space, because your fear was always that the producer would get frustrated and just pull the thing out and throw it away or whatever. So you wanted the song to start immediately, but you couldn't clip the beginning of the song because of the leader. And then you want the spacing between the songs to be just right. You didn't want there to be too much space, because you didn't want him to pull the tape out again. But you didn't want it to be too close, because if you put them too close, a cassette deck that had automatic search feature on it, if you hit fast forward to go to the next song, it wouldn't stop at that song because they were too close. So there was an exact spacing between
Mastering
the songs.
For cassette.
Yeah, it's
sequencing for cassette.
Crazy stuff, but it was crazy enough to make it where they wanted to hire an engineer to do it. So I did a lot of that, and I did a lot of wiring for songwriters' home studios. They would 8-track reel-to-reels and even 4-track cassettes, and 8-track cassette recorders were a popular thing for songwriters to use, and those songwriters were not generally very technical people, so there was a separate preamp usually, and everything had to be wired to where it was real easy for them to just push a couple of buttons and record their demo. So I did help put that stuff together for people too.
Yeah. So At what point in that did you? Because I know like you have at least one recording studio now that you have your foot in. You have like 3, right?
I've got 2 kind of.
2 kind of, okay. What happened between I don't know which of those endeavors came first, and I know you do some live sound as well.
I started. I
don't know what year we're in at this point, I guess.
So I graduated in '88, December of '88. Okay. So '89, I'm just engineering at that point, and I end up, and I'm doing mostly publishing demos for. I got connected with, I think primarily because my apartment complex was across the street from his house, but a guy named Mike Lawler, who is a keyboard player and a songwriter, and he felt it was much easier to take advantage of somebody who lived across the street than somebody from across town, because what he would do is book me for, book all day Friday and Saturday, hold those for me or whatever. And then Friday would come and he goes, okay, I need you to get me a vocal sound, be over at 9 o'clock. I'd come over at 9, we'd spend about 30 minutes getting a vocal sound, and he goes, okay, I'm good to punch it in. So you're off the clock, don't leave the house, but sometime between 11 and 1, I'll call you to come back over and we'll get a guitar sound. So I'd go back home and weep because I was off the clock, but I was still somehow working. But I did all this tech work for people too, so I had my whole soldering bench and everything at home. So I'd go back home and I'd be making cables for people or whatever, so I'd somehow still be able to make some money. And then he'd call me and I'd go back over. But so I'm doing that, and then I start working for. I'm working for several different publishing companies. I work regularly for a company called Will and David Music, which is it's Will Jennings and David Briggs. And David Briggs is the David from House of David Studios. Some of you may know that studio in town. So I worked for that studio and for the publishing company doing demos. And the songwriters, a lot of times, songwriters are always playing songwriter nights and everything around town. So, and they would always get frustrated with the club sound people and things. So I'd be doing a demo with some guy all day, and he's like, man, I'm doing a writer's thing tonight at 9 o'clock. Any chance you'd be up for coming down and doing sound for me? I'll throw you an extra $75 or whatever. I was like, oh yeah, I'd be glad to do that. So I started going down at night and I would start doing these singer-songwriter things with writers that I've been working with during the day, and I love that, and they feel comfortable with me, and I love live music anyway, and so I just keep doing that, and I'm up for doing and once in a while I'm going out with a band doing sound or something too, but I've got, and you're trying to get advice from everybody you can, and I've got several engineers who are like, man, you're going to mess yourself up. You need to decide. You need to be a studio guy or a live guy, but you can't do both. It just doesn't work in this business. You're going to be one or the other. So, but I enjoyed both, and I didn't want to say no to one or the other. So I just decided, well, I'm just not going to talk about doing the live stuff. If somebody asks me to do it, I'll go do it, but I'm just going to, put my energy towards studio stuff, but still do the live stuff. So that's kind of what I've always done and still do now, and when I got started, I guess I was, 22 years old when I got out of college, and I kind of thought, well, this is a pretty cool career. And it was crazy long hours at the time. A lot of 70, 80-hour weeks and multiple, regular all-nighters and those kind of things, and which I'm sure you guys are all accustomed to. And I was like, man, I don't know how long I can keep this up. I guess probably around 30, I'll need to start thinking about another career thing, because I won't be able to keep going much longer, And then I hit 30, and I'm like, dang, man, I'm still really digging this. Maybe I can get another 5 or 6 years out of it. And then I hit 40, and it's like, wow, I'm still doing this. Well, if I'm going to change career paths, I need to think about, at some point figuring something else out I can do. And then I hit 50 over a year ago. I'm 51 now, and it's like, well, I guess there's nothing else I can do. Nobody's going to hire me to do anything else at this point, so I'm kind of stuck. But amazing enough, I still enjoy it. And I think part of the reason I enjoy it is because I'm not doing the exact same thing every day. There's enough variety to keep it exciting, and I love to take a break and go out of town for a day or two and do a couple of shows, and then when I come back, I'm all revitalized, ready to jump in the studio and do some work with people. And I know you've experienced some of that too, but I think that's a great way to do it,
Yeah. Well, so you've been really modest not to name some of the names of people that you've worked with, and I don't know when things kind of like picked up with folks of higher notoriety that you worked with along the way, but I'm interested. Like, I don't quite know the progression of I've looked at your credit list, and there's lots of people that I recognize, like Rich Mullins, the Jesus record that your name is attached to, and there's Sixpence None the Richer, and there's Wilco. There's a lot of people that I put on the thing, and I was like, I need to ask you about this.
I guess I was working with a lot of accomplished songwriters on demos and stuff early on when I first got out of school, and I had done. I was in the studio with a band called Say So, that was a husband and wife duo. Ironic enough, it's Jim and Kim Thomas, who are my pastors at the Village Chapel now, the place where I go to church. But they were singer-songwriters and touring band for years before they ever got into that. And Jim was friends with Steve Taylor, who is an artist, and Steve was in a band called Chagall Guevara that was a local rock band, and they got signed to MCA, and were one of the first rock bands out of Nashville to get signed at that point. And they were looking for a new sound guy, because their old sound guy, who I think was good, but had thrown 2 or 3 people through a wall at some point, and
it's not so good for job
security.
security.
There were some police issues and making things potentially expensive for the band, so they decided they wanted to get somebody that was hopefully as good, but definitely wouldn't, and in my case, doesn't have the capacity to throw somebody through a wall. So I get a call from Steve about going doing sound for him. So and I was a fan of the band already, and had been a fan of Steve as a solo artist before that, and so I go out and we hit it off well, and did a bunch of shows with them over the period of about a year and a half, I guess, and that was while I was working at House of David, because I just remember having to work studio hours around going out with them on weekend, and the studio was really great there were a couple of engineers there, so I could always work my schedule out to make it work, and then the band kind of was taking a break for a while, and Steve was co-writing with Peter Furler, who is the drummer, or was the drummer at that point, from the Newsboys.
Okay.
Who at that point were a band that had done 2 records, and the first one I think sold 6,000 or 7,000 copies, and the second one sold 35,000 copies or something. So they were a very small band, and Steve starts writing with Peter, and they decide, the guy from the label asked Steve to co-produce with Peter the 2 songs for the album. And Steve has already I've got to know him pretty well from traveling with him, and he knows that that's what I want to do, and he is not plugged into the studio scene really in Nashville, so he says, hey, would you be up for doing these couple of songs? And I said, oh yeah, I'd love to, and so we jump in, and originally it's 2 songs, or maybe it was 3, I can't remember, but all I know is they kept writing, and it was going so well, and the label was thrilled with the way it was going, and so Steve and Peter end up co-writing the whole record. I engineered the whole record.
Oh, wow.
And it's the first label thing I ever worked on, and it ended up being a gold record, and sold, I don't know what it ended up selling, I think 700,000 or 800,000 units or something, but it was a big record. And then and crazy hours and round the clock stuff. So Steve and I worked really well together, so we he decided that we're going to keep doing this, and then Chagall was still on hiatus, so Steve decided he was going to do a solo record, and we went in and did 3 songs to pitch, or 2 or 3 songs to try to get a deal, because he didn't have a deal. So we do these demos, and I mix them and everything, and then he gets a deal, and we go in and so we record a whole record again with Steve. Yeah. And then at that point, I can tell you, after the first record, the Newsboys record, before we jumped in and started Steve's solo record, Steve went over the budget with me, and he goes, hey, I'm looking back at the budget, and I'm trying to figure out how next time we do another record, how we could be a little smarter and put money in better places to make either it easier for us or the record better or whatever. And he looked, and we had spent $12,000, I think, in equipment rental throughout that record, renting vocal mics and renting different pieces of gear and all this kind of stuff. So when it was time to do his record, he goes, you know what? Why don't you take that $12,000, buy the gear, we'll co-own it, and let's do a record without renting anything. So we did that, and I bought a GML EQ that I still use all the time today. Bought a Sony C800G that I still use all the time. Bought a Hardy M1 mic pre that I still use today, and all this gear that I still use all the time now was bought for that record, and then we start the next record. We do the same thing again and start buying some more gear. And I'm trying to think what record that was. Steve's record. We did that. Well, then it was the next record, I guess, which was another Newsboys record called Going Public, and that was what Steve was talking at that point. We did the same thing and looked at budget again. And he said, man, we spent this much money on a studio. Would it make sense for us to try to get into a studio situation? So I was like, well, maybe so. So we started, I was looking at buying a house anyway. So the carport, which was my home-based studio for how many years? From 94 to 22 years. It was my home-based studio. Steve and I were partners originally, and we built it, and we did it solely to do that record. And I mean, we paid for a big chunk of the studio with that one record, and had the whole, I mean, all the gear and everything paid for within just a few years, and just kind of went from there. And that was that Going Public was actually, I'm pretty sure it was a platinum record, or if not, it was really close to it. But we did it, and I mixed that one too, recorded and mixed it all at the carport. It was the first record I did there, and it went platinum. And then did another Newsboys record. So at that point, and I've got, just because there's not that many records that go gold and platinum, although there were a lot more at that time than there are now, but I've got people interested in working with me because of that. I've got people interested in working in the studio because of that, and I'm booked all the time. I mean, as much as I can. I mean, I'm turning, which those days are gone, into turning stuff away or recommending stuff to other people, but because I can do most all the stuff that comes my way now. But at that point, I mean, it was always exciting for when something came across my plate that I didn't have time to do, because I was like, oh yeah, who's my favorite engineer? Oh yeah, Shane Wilson would be great for that, or whatever, because you could throw work to your buddies or whatever, and everybody was busy all the time. But so that happened, and then I had mixed an EP for a Texas band called Sixpence None the Richer, who had done a few records already, and it went great, and called Tickets for a Prayer Wheel, and they got in a really bad record company situation. And I don't remember all the details. All I know is it was unethical and unfair, and they had attorneys fighting to get him out, but it was going to be a lengthy process. And Steve became friends with Matt, and they start talking, and Matt's written all these songs, and they want to put out another record, and but they're not able to do one because of the record label things. So Steve comes to me and says, man, I think we're going to do a record that we got to keep under the, we can't really let the word out that we're doing it, but we're going to, without letting anybody know, make a whole record on this band, because we got attorneys fighting, and Steve was helping pay to get the attorneys to get him out of the deal, but until we get out of the deal, we can't do anything, because they'll end up, coming, confiscating all the tapes and potentially putting somebody in jail or something. So we're looking at a place to do this record, and there was a studio on Music Row that had been called Sanctuary Recording, and that's where we had tracked. Well, we had done another Newsboys record after that called Take Me to Your Leader, and we had done it at Sanctuary, and Steve and I had loved working there, and the way we were kind of working with the carport is we were tracking. Our plan was always go a couple of weeks to another studio, a big studio, track there, and then go back to the carport for all of our overdubs and mix, and because it's just pretty small, and it's basically a control room and one other room, but plenty of space to do guitar overdubs or vocals or anything like that. So that was our routine way of working, and the Take Me to Your Leader record was the biggest at that point, the biggest record Newsboys had ever had, and went platinum. And I didn't mix it, but Tom Lord Alge mixed it, which was I was a big fan of his, so I was excited to have him mix a record, and I got to hang out with him a fair amount while he was working, which was great. And then we jump in on this Sixpence None the Richer record. Well, we're trying to figure out where to do it, and it turns out we looked at Sanctuary, and Sanctuary has went out of business. They've closed down. It's an abandoned building, and Steve's like, well, maybe we could rent the building for a month, and we've already got all this gear at the carport. We could bring in, maybe buy a few more things, but have enough gear to set up a tracking studio. So we go into the studio and look, and it has been, because somebody was looking at buying it or remodeling it, but they went through and cut with knives all the fabric on the walls to see what was behind it, because they were assuming that it was not going to be used. But it's pretty trashed up because of all this people digging in behind walls and tearing into them to see what stuff's made out of. So we set up in there. We decided we rent it for I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 months, but we rent it for nothing, $1,500 or something a month to in its terrible state to record this record. Ironically, the one building, I don't know what direction it is, west of the studio is their label. So when we were sitting in the control room, we are literally about 75 feet from the president of their label, that if he had any idea we were recording, he would have went crazy. But of course we're not going to tell him. So we're like even watching when we're driving into the studio every day and just trying to keep it completely quiet. But anyway, we get through the whole thing and record. We rented a API sidecar, R.S. Field, who's an amazing producer in town, used to have this, I guess it was I can't remember if it was 12 or 16 channels, but this little, I think it was 16 channel API sidecar that just was, sounded amazing. So we rented that to track through and then supplemented it with all the other gear that we had, and then recorded the record there, and then we went back to the carport and did the overdubs, and I mixed it at the carport, and then Steve's pitching, and Steve's got a manager he's working with, and they're pitching the album, trying to get a label to pick it up, and they can't. Well, they're pitching it. They got to be careful about how they pitch it because they can't let the other label know, and they're trying to keep it secret and all this stuff. And I don't remember the exact timeline, but I know the lawsuit or the legal battles ended and the band was free to go. So now we can do anything we want with the record. But for whatever reason, we can't get another label, or Steve can't get another label to pick it up. So Steve just decides, man, and he believes in this record 100%. He goes, this is going to be a huge record. I'm going to put it out myself. So all of a sudden he starts checking into funding, and he starts this label. He starts a label called Squint Entertainment, and he's going to put out with 2 employees, and they're going to put this record out. And the record comes out, and for them, it's doing great because I don't think they'd ever sold more than 40 or 50,000. But it's not an instant success, but it's building slowly and slowly. And I guess it got up to about 75,000 units, and they hire it got some kind of a placement in some TV show, and then got some interest from some program directors. I guess they hired an independent promoter or something, but the deal was the guy told him, he goes, listen, I need something, a name that I can tie to this. He goes, it's an unknown band, unknown producer, unknown mix engineer. I need to be able to have one known factor in there somewhere. So before I pitch it, I would suggest you get somebody to remix the single, and that'll make it much easier to get radio to play. So, they decide Bob Clearmountain's going to remix 3 of the tunes. The single, which is a song called Kiss Me, and the next 2 songs, which are going to be the next singles. And Steve has always been really great about all this and this kind of stuff. And he goes, man, we're going to get Bob to do it. Man, can you come out and be there for the mix session and everything else? And I was like, of course. And then my wife was not so keen on it since they were going out the day after we got back from our honeymoon. So, but Steve actually begged my wife and said, listen, this is a really big deal for him. You've got to let him do this. So I ended up not going the day I got back, but waiting a day and then going and got to hang out at Bob Clearmountain's studio while he mixed and hear amazing stories about him working with David Bowie and the Rolling Stones and Bryan Adams and all these crazy great records he mixed. But and he was all about, because he didn't have very many technical people come by. He was all about telling the stories and stuff, and was just the nicest guy in the world, and was real respectful of my mixes that he was remixing them. He listened to them ahead of time, and really recreated the mix. It felt to me a lot like it was basically my mix with a way better sounding vocal and a way better sounding snare, and a little bit better sounding everything else. But still, he retained most of the panning and everything I had done, which I thought was a real big compliment. And so then the album goes back out, and it's mixed by Bob Clearmountain, and all of a sudden the person, the consultant or whoever was right, because everybody starts playing this Kiss Me like crazy. And it became a number one song relatively quick, and then went on to become a number one song in 9 countries. And used to, when I would drive to a studio in the morning, I would every day get in the car, start scrolling through stations, and my whole goal was to see how many different stations I could hear Kiss Me on before I got to the studio where I was going. And a lot of times it'd be 4 or 5 stations I would hear this song played on before I got to the studio where I was going to be working at, which was just crazy. And then my wife and I went on vacation to Europe, and we heard it in England, we heard it in Germany, we heard it in Austria, and
So did she feel a little bit better about the whole?
she felt way better about it.
I mean, of all the songs it could have been, to have that story.
Yeah, so
That's a good one.
it was
That's
crazy.
pretty special.
And the thing that kept going through my head was, because this had been done we did the vocals for that in the carport, and so I'm in Austria and hearing this song on the radio, and all that I can think is, that vocal was recorded in my garage. That vocal was recorded in my garage. That vocal was recorded in my garage. And just can't believe that we're in the other side of the world hearing a vocal that was recorded in my garage. And it was a different time then, too, because there's a lot of home studios now, but home studios were not that common at the time. And people do great work at home studios all the time now, but at that point, a home studio usually meant 4-track cassette or something like that. And it was a big, every time I booked somebody to work at the carport, I always had to either have them come over and look at it so they could tell it felt like a real studio, or tell them some of the stuff I did there. I mean, people were very hesitant people just didn't want to do any work at a home studio, because that just meant that it wasn't professional or wasn't the quality.
I know all about that. I hear you. Yeah.
So.
Wow. Except I haven't cut Kiss Me.
No.
There. Wow. When my wife and I first moved to Nashville, which this was just in 2009, so it was long after that, but maybe it was like a year or so in. So I'd worked with Paul Moak for a little while, and so Will Sales was around a bit.
Oh, right.
And he, it might have been one of the earlier Live on the Greens, maybe, that Sixpence played.
Oh, right, I remember they played it one.
Yeah, and it was my first or second year in Nashville, and I remember my wife and I going, because we really liked that song. I mean, who doesn't? And we had stopped at King Solomon's Euros, got some Euros, parked at Public Square, get up to the top, and we're like just getting our, we're poor and new to town, and our cardboard clamshells open with Euros, and Will was playing with them that night on stage, and we hear the song, and it sounds like the record, and I was like, I can't believe we're like within 100 yards of this band playing this song that we really love, and I somehow already know one of the humans on stage. So
that's awesome.
It was just so I literally just moved to the other side of the radio. So anyway, that's incredible. Man, and what year was that? I don't know what year did that song come out?
The song came out in early, I think it came out in early, sometime in 97. Because because it was the remix that the album had already been out. 97 was the year I got married. So
so you would know.
That was when it was. I mean, it was out. I feel like we maybe started recording the end of '96, and then it came out in '97, and then it had been out for a few months when Clearmountain did the remixes.
I imagine that helped you with saying we could record at the carport.
Yeah, it helps a lot when you. A number one song in 9 countries is a good calling card to come record at my home studio.
Come record at my house. Lee Nash says it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
She sounds good here. I think you might too.
And
if you don't, it's not us. It's you.
Another interesting thing about that song, because which Bob Clearmountain was very surprised as well. but the vocal was recorded with a 4038, which people don't think of that as being a great vocal mic a lot of times.
Air too.
But it's a lot of air, and there's a lot of. I mean, it's just you got to boost it, but that GML EQ, ironic enough, it's several years later, and it was the Hardy mic 3, and it was GML EQ, and it was the 4038 ribbon mic on the vocal.
Wow.
So
I don't know if the rest of these people are old enough to appreciate all this, but
so your parents probably loved that song.
Such a great song. Go look it up, kids. Man, that's awesome. So, so I also noticed that you had some Wilco credits. How does that tie into your story?
Well, I guess I don't remember what year that was. That was at the White House, and it might have been 98 or 99. So right after we finished recording there, recording the Sixpence record, we decided that this was going to be, let's keep this studio going. This has been great. Let's get a long-term lease. So we got a 6-year lease with there were our options for two-year options, and I don't remember exactly. I know we had it open for 4 years, and we didn't sign again because we thought, even though it's really nice having this great studio, when you each lose about $5 to $10 grand a year trying to keep it open, it's probably not worth it. So that was my not profitable studio venture.
Wait, which studio was that?
That's the White House.
The White House. Okay.
That's the studio.
That?
Well, that was Sanctuary.
The Sanctuary.
That was Sanctuary. Then
Renamed,
I never told you that.
House. Okay,
when we opened it, we called it the White House.
That's what I'm up here for.
Yeah.
It's just to
Yeah,
understand.
and I didn't explain that.
No, that's
so,
okay. You did now.
So you can edit that to make it all sound cohesive. So when we opened the Sanctuary studio as our own, we decided to call it the White House.
Gotcha.
And I don't remember when it started. Jerry Del McFadden, who's a keyboard player who lives in Germany now, but plays with the Mavericks, one of the few country bands that I love, and he's been with them forever. I've known him. I don't even know when I first got to know him, but I might have even known him at Belmont. I mean, I've known him since the 80s at some point, but we worked together on and off on different things, and he's always doing bizarre stuff. And I mean, we did over the years, tons of soundtracks for animated kids cartoon books, animated kids books, and all kinds of crazy stuff. But he calls me one day and goes, "Man, we're going to put this side project band together with a bunch of guys from other bands." And it was him and Robert Reynolds from the Mavericks. Mavericks were already going at that point, and Tom Peterson from Cheap Trick, who had just moved here and had since moved away, but he lives here again now, and Ken Coomer from Wilco, and that may have been the core. Oh no, and Doug Powell, who is an artist who had been on RCA and was a great songwriter too, and had toured with Todd Rundgren, ended up working for Todd Rundgren for several years. But those were the main guys, and then there were a handful of other people that came and went. But they're going to just start doing music and see what happens. So we start recording whenever they have downtime, and they're all in town. And I get to know Ken Coomer pretty well, and Ken, crazy enough, is from Nashville, born in Nashville, grew up in Nashville, and had been in Uncle Tupelo before. And then when that split up went up, one of the guys went and became Sun Volt, and then the other guys started Wilco, and I worked with John, the bass player from Wilco, on some of that swag stuff too. And I worked with Jay Bennett, who's since passed away, who was the guitar player or multi-instrumentalist for Wilco, and got to know all of them fairly well. And then Wilco was out with Sheryl Crow opening up for her, and they decided that they were going to make their next record. Instead of blocking out 6 weeks, they were going to make their next record while on the road with her. And anytime they had a couple of days off, they were going to rent a local studio or whatever and record. And they had a few days off in Nashville, and Ken was suggested to the band, "Hey, my friend Russ has a studio, the White House, that would be a great place for us to record. And and a couple of the guys already knew me and were like, oh yeah, that'd be great. So anyway, it happened. And so that was it. They had a few days off. We recorded at the White House, and I was a fan of the band already. I mean, I knew Ken, but I was a big fan. I was a fan of Sunvolt, Uncle Tupelo, all those. I mean, that's my favorite kind of music. And so I was really excited about him being there. And I remember we had strict no smoking policy in the studio, and I remember somehow there's all of a sudden 4 guys smoking inside this studio, and I remember calling up Steve, because Steve was like, if anybody smokes in here, you'll smell it for 6 months. We cannot let anybody smoke. And I remember calling up Steve and going, I'm going to break the smoking rule for today, just so you know. I got Wilco here, and
Just for today.
so anyway,
okay.
They recorded and they smoked, and but then we did several songs. But they did, I can't remember, I mean, Ken told me, I think they did 30 songs or something over the period of the tour. So I'm just like, oh gee, please, one of these songs or some of these songs or whatever, make it and parts of a couple of them in one full song is what ended up being on there. But I was just pretty dang excited that something made the record, so.
Wow. So how long did you, what was so we've established the place is called the White House now. How long was that a thing? And that was running in tandem with the carport.
Yeah, and so it became the place where I went to track.
To do the big track,
and then
the carport was.
And I had a studio manager, and it got rented out to other people other times. And I mean, I had.
This also sounds very familiar to me.
All kinds of. Susan Rogers, who's a big producer, did several things there, and I had tons of people in town. I mean, Paul Moak worked there a bunch of times. I mean, everybody worked there.
Yeah.
But I was probably doing 20% of the stuff that was done there, and then the rest of the time or maybe not even quite that much, or it depends on the time. But like I said, at that time, it was not uncommon to do a record for 6 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that. So if we might block book it for a good chunk of time, and be there for a long time, and then maybe not be there for a while. But DC Talk did one of their records there, which I didn't engineer, but I mean they were there for forever. And Todd Rollins did. Shane Wilson did tons of records there, and Brent Milligan was there. A lot of different. People.
Man. Okay. So did that then lead to? Because I know you have had or do have a hand in the Brown Owl, part owner. Did that transition to that, or where's?
Well, the White House, like I said, even though we had a lot of great projects through there, it was ultimately a money-losing venture, just because we had a high rent on Music Row, and we had a gear that required a fair amount of maintenance, and a 2-inch analog machine that required a lot of maintenance, and it was just it was a lot of money, and it didn't. I mean, we're not talking losing tons of money, but I think we had, $7,500 a month is what we needed to break even or something like that. A pretty good chunk of money when it was all said and done, and it doesn't take very many months of. If you have a couple of $4,000 months, it's really hard to catch up.
Right. Yeah.
So we ultimately decided this isn't worth it, and we also had a terrible landlord that wouldn't fix anything, and we ended up paying multiple times out of our own pockets to fix stuff, and a bunch of other stuff like that too that was frustrating. After 4 years, we opted to not sign on for 2 more. We opted to close the doors. So some of the gear we sold off, but I kept a lot of it. The Neve, I had a Neve console, and I ended up buying them. For that first record, I rented that API that I was talking about. But after that, I bought a Neve console, and which was one of the great things about it. Recording through that. It was a Neve sidecar. Actually, it didn't have a monitor section built in, but it sounded great, and 20 channels. And when I sold it, I kept 2 of the modules, which are racked up at the Brown Owl now. So you can, if anybody ever works at the Brown Owl, not to take any business away from you, use those Neve modules, because those will give you the Wilco sound.
Touche.
So we closed it down. I sold a few things off. I'm not a big fan of getting rid of gear. The same problem that I have getting new gear makes it hard to get rid of gear. So I throw all this stuff in my basement. Some of it goes back to the carport. It goes to my basement. At that point, I lived in a house with a big basement, and I just figured at some point I'm going to open up a new studio. Well, then as I continue to work and work, I find myself mixing more and more. I mean, there was a point where I was actually probably spending 2/3 of my time tracking and 1/3 of my time mixing, and then I realized that I'm hardly tracking at all. And at one point, I look at my calendar and realize that I have actually went 12 months without recording, doing a tracking session. I mean, I've done some vocal overdubs and guitars here and there, but I have not done a tracking session for more than 12 months. So maybe it doesn't make sense to have whatever 150 microphones and 50 channels of mic pre's and all this stuff that's doesn't help you at all when you mix, only helps when you track. So Conrad Snyder, who some of you may know is a great producer engineer in town, but was my intern at the time, and or maybe he had just finished being my intern, I can't remember, but he had been my intern for a while, and he was my most knowledgeable friend about current prices of gear, because he was always buying and selling stuff. So I called him up and we went to lunch, and I just said, hey, here's what I'm thinking of doing. I want to keep enough stuff to where I can still track, but I think I want to get rid of about 2/3 of my gear, because I don't think it makes sense to keep all this stuff since I'm not using it at all. And so if you can help me look through, I'm not dead set on keeping anything. I want to sell the stuff that I can get the most return on my investment on, and then the other stuff, I mean, I like everything I've got, so I'll just, as long as I keep a certain 12 mic pre-channels, that's great. As long as I keep enough stuff to do a whole drum kit and all this stuff. So he leaves. A couple days later, I expect to get an email with a list of dollar figures of what he thinks we can get and everything, and he says, hey, let's go to lunch. And I was like, all right. And so we go to lunch, and he goes, and he was partners in the Brown Owl at the time, and he goes, man, what would you think about, instead of selling this stuff, about joining with us and becoming part of the Brown Owl? And we're looking at expanding and trying to increase our clientele, and reach out to some new people who are expecting a little more than what we have to offer. And I was all concerned about, well, I don't want to get a situation where I'm paying money again. Let's talk about your books. How many months a year are you profitable? He's like, oh, we're profitable every month. I'm like, well, I mean, what? I mean, it turns out in like 3 or 4 years, they had only lost money 2 months, and it was because of some air conditioner repairs or something like that. And it was, I mean, 1 month it was like 175 in the hole, and the other one was 400 in the hole or something. But I mean, never any of these 2,000 in the hole or 2,500 in the hole things that I was used to. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds great. I would definitely want to be a part of that. And so basically moved a bunch of my stuff over there then, and have been a part of the Brown Owl ever since. And but have found myself in the same situation. I go through ups and downs, but this year I've only tracked 5 days the whole year. I mean, the rest has been mixing, so it's still, I'm still in that situation. Although most years I do more than this, but this year it's not been very many.
Yeah.
But so that's how I got involved in the Brown Owl, which I think was 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay. And you've recently moved your mix operation to
home, to my house. I've got my new studio is called Dangerland, and it's at my house in Brentwood. And I moved to Brentwood 6 years ago, and was commuting to the carport, which was however far away. Well, it was about a 20-minute drive when I moved there, and then 6 years later, it's between 45 minutes and an hour every time, because of the increase in traffic in Nashville. And I've got little kids who I try to I do everything I can to make them remember they have a dad. And one of those things is to have dinner with them and tuck them in at night. And it was becoming a bit difficult to do both of those things and work. So decided to make the move to move my operation home, so it was easy to start and stop around their schedules. And also to redesign a place that I think better fits my current needs. The carport, when I first designed it, I mean, I was dead set on having a lounge area, because there were always people from the label coming by, and they needed a place to sit and talk on the phone. And I had multiple phone lines because there were no cell phones when I built the place, and all this stuff. And it's like, there's no people from the label that ever come by anymore. I mean, occasionally people from the band come by when you're mixing, but never does anybody from the label come by, because they all know that they can send you an email of a couple of changes if there's something they don't like, and you'll make the changes, because you can, because it's easy to do that now. So I wanted to have a better space to where there's a bigger control room and not a little tiny lounge area dedicated for people that aren't there. And so I had somebody else, a guy named Tony Esterly, who's a producer, songwriter, engineer in town, moved in to the old space, but moved his own gear in. I moved all my stuff out, and now I'm working out of there full time, and it's been great.
Awesome. Well, I just looked at my watch, and we've been talking for a while, so we'll let these good people take a break, and then they can come back with their questions for you.
Awesome.
Music City Listeners is brought to you by 4115, the East Nashville recording studio dedicated to serving up homestyle recordings since 2012. And Music City Content Kings, a creative photo and video production company that believes in transparency and value. Good to Go, serving up the goodness from our favorite food truck and catering events for people who have good taste. And Handmade Productions, a couple of wildly talented dudes making all things music and video.
Yeah, so in this part, this is where you guys get a chance to ask your own questions. And it is fair game to ask, nerdy gear questions, though I will say there's probably lots of great places where you've already said lots of nerdy gear things, but you seem like you are okay with answering nerdy gear questions, but anyway.
I'll answer anything.
You'll answer it. I'll answer anything. But yeah, so I'm gonna get out of the way here and let you guys ask questions. So yeah, ask away.
Yes.
What would you say? Because I guess for me, there's a lot of, whether it's in the music industry or strictly engineering, there's always like you kind of touched on for a moment, being either studio or live, like not being part of both. What are some pros of working in both, or having worked in both fields, or if you still do that now?
What are the advantages of working in both fields?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of studio guys who completely lose what a good performance is, or the way a band connects with an audience, because all they ever do is sit in the studio. I mean, the whole idea behind a record is, even if you do it as one thing at a time and it's a bunch of overdubs, you're still trying to capture this amazing, great performance. And if you are totally disjointed from what a live performance is, I think it's really hard to recreate that in a studio. So that's one of the great things about doing live, either watching shows or doing live sound, that it helps you connect to what a live performance is. Something else that doing a live show does, as far as you getting your chops together for studio stuff, is you have to work quick. You can't spend 20 minutes on a kick drum sound during a live show because there's not enough time. You're already halfway through your set at that point. So you've got to learn to work really quick. And a lot of times that's critical in the studio. And a lot of times engineers burn a band or a musician out by spending too long getting sounds, and the guy's already fried when it comes time to record his part because you spent so long tweaking things. So being able to work real quick is another thing, I think, that how live sound can complement your workflow in the studio. Yeah.
So I've written down two here while I was listening to you speak. And I had, have you found yourself needing to tap into multiple income streams or finding other ways to monetize the craft in order to stay profitable? And then my second part was, where do you see the future of the engineering title kind of going with the change of technology in the music industry?
The first thing was, do I need to monetize? Say it one more time, I'm sorry.
I was saying, do you tap into other income streams? You talked a lot about, being business owners for studios, and just wondering if there's any other creative ways in terms of monetizing the craft.
Well, the studios themselves really don't generate any income. They're more of a break-even. They make a little bit of money, but not anything significant. It's more of providing me the means to work myself and work at my own rate and my own with my own rules. But I think multiple revenue streams is definitely the way of the future. And occasionally I can rent gear to different projects, or I mean, I do some live recording too, and I'm usually able to rent some gear when I do that kind of stuff, which is great. And I write reviews for a magazine, which generates a little bit of income. I mean, nowhere near enough to live on. But my idea is, I mean, I don't ever want to I don't want a day off. I don't want to sit home and watch TV all day. I'm always going to do something. So if for some reason I end up with the project getting delayed or something getting done early, if I've got a day, I'm going to spend that writing or using some gear that I can write about later or something like that. So, but I mean, I think, and then getting to the future of, and those are related questions, and the future of the recording engineer, sadly, I think it's a dying craft, and I don't think there's going to be, in 50 years, I don't think there's going to be recording engineers the way there are today. I mean, I think there's not near as many now as there were when I got started, and one of the keys is, for anybody young getting started, is to be as diversified as you can. I mean, when I got started, I don't think that was necessarily the case. I think it was better because there were so many specialists involved in making a record. But now there's got to be a lot of overlap because you can't hire that many people to make a record anymore. So if you've got a guy who's a great engineer but can also play the guitar great, or can also program a track or program beats, or can play bass or whatever, but the more things you can bring to the party, the better it is, the better chance you have of success these days. And even if you're not using all those skills all the time, you have more potential revenue streams. And I don't think you're going to necessarily get more income. I mean, if you play bass and play drums and engineer a record, you're probably not going to get paid for 3 people's jobs, but you are going to get paid for one full job, and you're going to get hired again for the next one because they like you and they know you can do multiple things. I mean, that's what I think. It's a tough, but it's a tough business now. It's a tough time to be getting into it, you know. I mean, I know most of you guys are probably, how many people are doing this full time right now? So that's almost everybody. So that's great. I mean, you've probably, all you who are doing it full time have probably seen even a difference in the last few years. It seems like every year it gets a little harder to be somebody starting out. But like I said, it was a totally different thing when I got going, because it was, you routinely got booked for really long amounts of time, and sometimes certain things would have certain hours, and you would work with a band and they would quit at 8 o'clock every night or something like that. So you might know you could do a little bit of other stuff later at night if you had the energy to do it, or something, which when I was single, I did that kind of stuff all the time. I'd work regular full-time thing, but I would do some other things at night, or I would do things whenever. But it's, you don't get booked for those extended things like that anymore. I mean, I do a little bit of production here and there, and that's the only time I ever get to work lengthy times is if I'm involved in the production, and I don't get paid for being a producer. I mean, I engineer it all, and I basically pay myself to engineer and produce for free, because that's the only way I can ever make those budgets work. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. So
Yeah.
is that how? Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
I was just gonna ask: is that how you work most of the time? Are you being hired out mostly as a producer or engineer?
I get hired as an engineer most of the time. I generally, I mean, there's some great producers out there, and I think a great producer is somebody who can step into any situation and make a great record. He can recognize the weakness to the band or the artist, and he can fill the gaps and help them create something better than they could ever make on their own. I'm not a versatile producer in that way, and I think there's certain bands that I can connect with well because I've got strengths that can fill their weaknesses, but that's not everybody. It just depends. It has to be the right connection, because I don't have broad strengths. I mean, I've got a few things I think I can do pretty well, and if that happens to be the band's weakness, then I think we could be great working together. But otherwise, I might not be the best guy. I mean, that's just I think me recognizing my strengths and weaknesses, and it's definitely more work producing than it is. I mean, if you engineer, you can leave your work and go home. But when I'm producing, when I do a project, it's kind of on your mind all the time. I mean, it's round the clock work, and you're jotting things down at night and you're having to make phone calls with people late at night, and the first thing you do in the morning is you're listening back to things before you go in. I mean, it's all the time, where if you're engineering, you're kind of doing it while you're there, and you can leave it and go home and have a break.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, doing 1 or 2 projects a year as a producer feels right to me, and that's generally what I do.
Do you feel like the definition of the word demo has changed from when you started to 2017? And if so, like, what do you feel like the definition of that word is today?
Well, I think there's 2 different kinds of demos. There's a song demo and there's an artist demo, and I think I don't know if they've changed. I mean, what's expected of them is different, but I mean, an artist demo is trying to show what kind of an album an artist could make. So generally, you make that. I mean, most of the artist demos I've been involved in could be released as the record, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to show what a great record they can make at any time, and those are enjoyable demos to make, because you're and a lot of times you're working at a little slower pace. Sometimes those can be more creative than the actual record making process, because you're not under such, I mean, you might not be working in as nice of a place, but you got musicians probably working for a little less money, and you're not as watching the clock quite as tightly, so it can be a real creative time. I mean, a song demo is sometimes the same thing. I mean, you're trying to show what this song would sound like on a record, but it's a song demo, so you're not trying to make the actual record, and it's hard to get as inspired for a song demo to me as it is. I mean, the artist demos are very inspiring because they can potentially be the record. The song demo's a calling card to try to get somebody to record your song.
And is it expected, like, or is it understood, like, hey, I'm about to play you an artist demo, or I'm about to play you a song demo, not an artist demo, so don't expect much, or is...
No, I think people still try to make it just as good, because they want the artist to hear this song. But the thing is, if you're doing a song demo, a lot of times they have a certain artist in mind, and there's not as much creativity being done, because they're thinking, okay, this is a song we're pitching to Kenny Chesney. Let's put this Kenny Chesney part on it. Let's put the guitar on it. Let's put the copy of Kenny Chesney's song, because they want Kenny Chesney to record it. So there's not a lot of creativity going on, because you're trying to make it sound like that artist you're pitching it to. I mean, that's just my experience from working with the people, and there might be some people that feel different, but not me. Yeah.
What's the... Sorry, my accent's a bit weird. I'm from New Zealand originally. Sorry, that was inappropriate. What would be the number 1 attribute you'd be looking for at an artist that is approaching you, that one would, or multiple attributes in that artist, like character traits or whatever, passions, ethics, principles, convictions, that would create an environment for you as a producer / engineer that would cultivate an environment that is the most beneficial for them as an artist and enables them to be the most creative that they are, and you as a producer and engineer that enables you to, they get the most out of you, you get the most out of them. What are you looking for? And how do you identify that as this, as the producer and the engineer?
You mean as far as if an artist came to me and I was trying to see if it made sense for me to work with them?
Yeah, and also so you're like, oh, yes, this is what I'm looking for and here's why. Or vice versa, the negative side of that as well, like, hell no, I'm never going to work with this artist because of A, B, C, D.
Well, I feel like I have to connect with the artist. I mean, the preferred thing is that I connect with them musically. Like, there's something that makes me feel passionate about their music. Now, I can, as an engineer, I don't even have to I prefer to work on music that I like, but I don't have to love it. It doesn't have to be something I would even listen to. I feel like I can do a great job mixing a record, and pretty much most records I feel like I can do a great job. I mean, hip hop's probably not my forte, but outside of that, I feel like I can do a great job mixing a record, and I don't necessarily have to be a fan of it or connect with it emotionally. But to be involved from the production standpoint, which probably means I'm going to be helping pick songs and be involved far deeper than just the mix standpoint. I need to feel connected on an emotional level, that I feel like I need to feel passionate about the music. I need to feel like it's something I enjoy. I need to feel like I can offer something to it. I mean, and I tend to be drawn, I think, production-wise, to a lot of younger rock bands, just because I feel a lot of times they complicate things too much, and they've got these, sometimes it's too many ideas in a song, and I can identify, you know what, these are all three great ideas, but these two aren't as good as this one, and this is too many ideas for one song. You don't need three bridges. You don't need the thing to go 6 minutes. We can chop this, and this, and make it a 3.5 minute song, and it's going to be punchy and hit the point and connect with the audience. I mean, those are the kind of projects I think I connect with best, but I don't go in necessarily with a checklist of what I'm looking for. It's more of listening to some of the music and feeling like, oh yeah, I know what needs to happen to fix this or not. And if I don't feel like I could offer it anything or to make it better, then I don't necessarily feel like it's the right thing for me. But I don't want to change it either. That's another thing. I think a lot of band producers try to take something and make it into their own thing, and that's why I think there's a lot of technically great producers, but their stuff all sounds the same, which I don't think is a good thing, because I think bands who've spent a lot of time playing together in a garage or wherever they rehearse have come up with something that's their own. And I don't think you can edit songs and make them a little shorter and maybe move some parts around, but still keep the integrity of what they came up with, which I think is also important.
How is what about that's like from a music standpoint? What about a humanity standpoint? Like as far as like attitudes and ego.
Like if they're like, I would stay away from somebody with an ego.
No, it's just like humanity is like complex and messy. You know, like how have you worked with like say an incredible artist that is like incredibly insecure about themselves tracking a vocal versus, and also like a cocky, overconfident vocalist that is not realistic about their vocal, for example? Like how have you navigated those types of situations and like helped to benefit the record in the long run, you know?
Well, I think every scenario is different, and you kind of look at each one individually and try to decide what's the best thing to do. But my experience is, a lot of artists have egos, but they're all insecure as well. And you want to create, and which is typical of any artist, people are insecure about their art, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you need to be, vocals, you're always sensitive around vocalists, because you don't want, that's a very, you're very vulnerable when you sing. And I've done a lot of projects with singers where it's just me and it's a band, and the rest of the band wants to get there, and I tell the band, you know what, guys, I think it's probably best for it to be just me and the singer in the room. And a lot of times they want to turn the lights out because they don't even want me to see them or whatever, and that's a fine thing. But I try to be aware of that and try to read that, because sometimes they don't even know, but they know there's something that keeps them from feeling uncomfortable. And ironically, a lot of times it's the people who appear to have the biggest egos that are the most insecure. But I think as engineers, we need to be real sensitive to that. I don't think there's a black and white or a certain rule, but I think every situation's different. But we need to be aware, and I think it's easy as engineers or producers to sometimes say something that's real damaging or hurtful to somebody, and of course there's always joking that goes around, and that's great, and we should have a good time, and that helps relax the mood. But it's also important that we don't ever go too far and push somebody to the point to where it's going to impede their performance. And a lot of times it's easy to go too far because we become unaware of what people are like, and people, because they seem to have big egos or whatever, don't seem like they could ever be hurt. But the studio is a vulnerable place for everybody, but especially for a vocalist.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This could vary, from situation to situation, but what's maybe like in your earlier days of working and starting to learn to be busy and get work before you felt like you were really successful? What is something that you would do to get somebody who is interested in working with you to actually commit and put money forth or put effort forth? Because I see a lot that there's interest there, people who may reach out to you and want to work with you or want to do something, but they can't quite to make the jump to do it. And I don't know if, is the answer often just do it for free in your earlier days, or is it, I just don't know what that maybe looks like, or is there something that you did to get people to actually make it happen?
Well, I don't know what the answer to that is. It's tricky. I did a lot of spec stuff early on. You guys all know what spec stuff is? Everybody knows that it's specs when you do something for deferred payment or whatever, essentially, or you do it if I say I'll mix that on spec, that just means that if something happens with it, if a label picks it up, then I'm going to get paid, or if not, you don't owe me anything, which is essentially doing it for free, unless something happens with it. But of all the spec stuff I did, I think I only got paid twice. So I don't think it's necessarily a wise thing to do. But I do think it's important that you define, I think it's important that you define your value as well. So my thought's always been, if there's something you're trying to get, and you need to know, everybody should know what their rate is or what their normal price is or whatever. And if somebody wants to use you, but they don't have that kind of money or whatever, say, well, you know what? I'll do it for my regular rate's this, but I'll do it this time for this, or pay me to do 2 songs and I'll do the other 3 for free, or something along those lines. But it's important that they know what you're worth. So if you do 2 songs for full rate and then 3 for free, maybe that's something they can afford, but they know, at that point, they know what you're worth a song, and they feel, at least they don't feel, in their mind, you did 3 songs for free and 2 for full rate, instead of all of a sudden thinking you're a $50 a song guy or something, and then the next time they have a bit of a budget, well, they don't want to use you because they want to use somebody who's a higher dollar guy, so they're going to call somebody else. So you want them to feel, not to be manipulative, but you want them to feel indebted to you, not that you're a cheap guy. So, which is always a tricky thing, and I wouldn't even say it could be different with every client how you do that, but even now, I do things for all different price ranges all the time, as does every engineer I know, and sometimes, I've got a good friend who's a musician who's always said, good hang, good music, good money, pick 2 or whatever. And it's like, if it's a good hang and it's good money, it's okay if the music sucks. Or if it's good music and good money, I don't care if I'm working with jerks or whatever. You pick, as long as we got 2 of those, we're good. But if I listen to something and I love the music and they don't have much money, I'll say, well, you know what? I'll do it for that, but you got to give me 2 months to turn it around, because I'm going to fit it into in between other things, because I'm not going to turn anything down. I'm not going to block out 4 days to do that, but I also love it. I think it's great, and I think you got a lot of potential. So let's do it, and we'll make it happen. And then if I have to invoice them, I'm going to send them an invoice that says 4 songs, regular rate here, discounted to this or whatever. So when they get the invoice, they're like, oh man, they feel thankful, and that they remember that I gave them a big break. So they don't think of me as being a cheaper guy, but they think of me as being this more expensive guy who gave them a break, or whatever my rate is, But that's, it's always a tricky too, some of that stuff, because you got good clients who pay you your regular rate, and it's not fair to those long-term clients that I work with all the time to all of a sudden go work with somebody else for super cheap either. So, I mean, that's always a constant challenge, especially when there's so many low budget things. I mean, sometimes if I have something come across my plate, I won't even give them a number. I'll just say, well, what do you got? You know, let me hear the stuff. Yeah, if I like it, what do you got? And if it's real low, like I said, I'll say, well, you give me 2 months to turn it around. I'll do it for that, or you know, kind of based on what my schedule is. I'll give them a bigger window of time, and I'll do it in between stuff. Yep.
A two-part question. A, how do you manage A&R? Because sometimes A&R drives me nuts. And then the other question, I guess, with that is, I feel like the Kickstarters nowadays, it's kind of like changed the vibe of where the money comes from. And I feel like artists don't like really feel that a lot of artists aren't going to labels anymore in the same way. And they come to, I guess I would say they come to me and they're like, well, I have 5 songs. I've already decided what the songs are, which maybe isn't the best idea from my perspective, but how do you manage A&R, and then how do you manage an artist that thinks they're their own A&R, if that makes sense?
So how do I manage A&R? Meaning the A&R person from the...
Yeah, just when they come in, they're like, yeah, can we like tune the cymbals, you know, just like ridiculous stuff.
You've had somebody ask you to tune cymbals?
Yeah, just like, I mean, I've heard this album later, you know, but I'm just curious what your interactions look like with a business person that thinks they're creative, I guess.
Well, that's always tricky. I mean, I feel like, and I'm probably, a lot of engineers, friend engineers I know have far less patience for those people than I do. But I usually try to accommodate, or at least trick them into thinking that I'm accommodating. A lot of times they don't know whether you're really accommodating them or not. And but I'm usually nice to them and treat them like they are intelligent and know something about music. Which, I mean, it's just my personality, though. I try to make everybody happy. I mean, I don't know if that's best in those cases, though, because sometimes those people
push.
Yeah, and are crazy. I mean, and don't necessarily know anything. And a lot of times they're fighting against what the band's fighting for, you know.
Or what they said 2 emails ago.
Yeah. But, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's case by case thing. I mean, I'm not going to let them screw up the record.
Yeah.
But we'll try to accommodate them to the point of not screwing it up. And then if I have to undo something later, then I would.
Yeah. Okay.
And then Kickstarter, what was the other question?
Well, I've just found that artists that'll come into me that funded, you know, a Kickstarter, and then there's no A&R involved. They're completely independent, and they come to me with 5 songs. I guess this is really a production question, but like maybe they wrote 4 great songs and then they just threw a 5th one in there and they have a song, and managing, having those conversations like, hey, let's shoot for something else, or like being diplomatic in asking for better content, I guess, you know.
I mean, I don't think that's that. I mean, I think you can do that in a way that, I mean, without dogging a song, you can say, man, I think these 4 songs are great, and I think this 5th one, where it's really good, I don't think it's up to par with these first 4. I think you guys can come up with a better song, because I think we need 5 songs that are all on the same level instead of 1 good song and 4 great songs or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's ways to do that encourage the band, or either that or just say, you know what, if we're doing 5 songs, I don't think we need to choose 5 of 5 songs. I think you need to write 2 or 3 more, because we need to pick the best 5 out of 8. It's too hard to pick, just come in with 5 songs and assume that that's the best we're going to get.
Yeah, I've done that. That makes sense.
I mean, I've done that many times with bands, and actually tracked more songs than because sometimes you can't tell from their demos or whatever. And if we're doing a 10-song record and they've got 15 songs, then we pick the best 11 and we track those, and we decide which one to drop later, you know. And I tell them, you know, if you still feel good about it, we got the basic tracks, you know, we got the rhythm guitars and the bass and drums on that done. So you can, if you want to do some B-side or bonus thing down the road, you don't have to, you know, you can do it all at home.
Yep.
Or whatever. And then I don't know if you had a question about Kickstarter, but Kickstarter's such an interesting thing to me, because I looked at it as an evil drug for quite a while and thought it enabled untalented people to make records that they don't deserve. For a long time I thought that, and then I got to work on several great Kickstarter projects and realized that it also allows a band to make a great creative statement without having an A&R guy trying to screw it up. And they can do it all on their own, you know. So it can be a great thing too. But I've ended up becoming a big fan of Kickstarter just because some of my favorite things I've worked on in the last couple of years were crowdfunded and I think allowed us to do way better projects than we would have been able to do otherwise.
Plus, you can get paid.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's great.
plus you get paid. Yeah, which is a whole other thing. That's really nice.
The records are cooped up front with the Kickstarter. That's kind of nice for the producer. So you can get points from the back end. Get those points, people.
Points only work if you sell records, though, right?
That doesn't happen anymore. Sorry. Yeah.
Which people don't do anymore, I don't think. Yeah.
I would love to know if you can share your go-to like vocal chain when you're mixing, or if you even have a go-to if it's different every time. Or...
Well, I don't know if I necessarily have a go-to. I mean, I try to. A lot of guys have an exact thing they use every time, and I kind of jump around. But I mean, a few of the. I use a lot of Universal Audio plugins. I use a lot of Waves plugins, and I use that Trident. Although I use the soft tube, I use a lot of soft tube stuff too. I use the Trident A range as a global vocal shaping thing usually. I use Renaissance vocal compressor on vocals a lot. I use the soft tube TubeTech CL1B on vocals a lot. I use those the Waves, Q2, Q3, Q4 EQs on vocals a lot usually, which is not very much color, but more to pull out just a problem thing, not to overall sonically shape the sound, but or give it character, but to pull out a problematic something, frequency or something. I use the Universal Audio de-esser almost all the time. I mean, that's the things I use more than anything. But I mean, like I said, I jump around and use a bunch of different stuff.
What about on the way in?
Well, I would say my most common vocal chain is these days is the Gordon mic pre, which Gordon Instruments, it's a mic pre company in town, makes these amazing preamps, and I just think it's the most amazing thing on vocals. I use that, usually use the CL1B, the real thing, and the GML EQ, and often a distressor as well. I usually have a CL1B and a distressor, and the GML. So that's most often that. So, and I have DBX, which is the de-esser, 901 or 902? 902? Well, whatever the DBX compressor is, I mean DBX de-esser. I use that sometimes too if there's a sibilance problem, which is not as big of a concern these days as it used to be, because you can always fix that after the fact real easy. But if it's a huge, annoying problem, I'll track through it. Yeah.
How do you feel about the way, I guess people are now consuming music? It's really turned the industry upside down as far as, the internet and earbuds and MP3s. Because you also touched on the idea of, in the future, not being as many recording engineers. I mean, do you think that kind of stains the art of recording and producing and engineering the way that people are now consuming music?
Well, the problem is, which is not necessarily a problem, it's just the way technology has changed. I mean, people who aren't real engineers can actually do a decent job recording too. I mean, and you don't need to be able to, when I got started, I had to be a legitimate engineer, I had to be able to walk into pretty much any studio in town and record efficiently and make sure everything sounds good, and that whether it was a good studio or a bad studio, which is part of the reason I had 2 big racks worth of gear, and I had cartage that came with me every time I did a session, because I had gear that I knew inside out that I was real quick with, and I could, even if the studio had some great stuff, I might use it too, but I might only use my stuff because I knew how my stuff worked and how it sounded, and regardless of where I worked, people always got great sounding tracks. And now people rarely, even if they move around some, they only work at 2 or 3 different studios maybe, so they don't have to learn all that many different places, and they have their own couple pieces of gear, so they may not even be that a real engineer, but they could use their stuff more than adequate enough to get good quality recordings. So I wouldn't say that good engineering, I mean, there's not very many people though who could walk in and record a 60-piece orchestra, and I mean, there's only a handful of people in town that could do that now, but and I don't know who's going to replace them, because I don't know who's learning that skill on a day-to-day basis now, because it's not something that's being done as often as it used to be. So I think there's still people who can make quality. It's possible for people to make good sounding records who aren't engineers first, right, is what I'm saying. But people are consuming records totally different. You're right there. And people, I mean, there's not really record listening that I see very much like there used to be. I mean, when I was a kid, when I was a huge fan of music in high school, and I'd get a new album, and I had the best stereo of all my friends, and I had my, there were 3 or 4 friends that come over to my house, we'd sit on my bed, put on the record, and we would pass the credits back and forth, and we would sit there and listen to the whole thing. We might say a couple of words when we were turning the thing over, and then we'd listen to the other side. And that was how we listened to music. And when we listened to music, that's all we did was listen to music. But we spent way less time listening to music total as people do now. But when we listen, we really listen. Now people listen to music nonstop. I mean, my son has his earbuds in more than he has them out, and he's constantly listening to it. But it's background soundtrack music almost, and it's not something that he's listening to the way we listened to it when I was young. But MP3s, I mean, MP3s are, the quality is bad, but I think they get a worse rap than they deserve, because the algorithms that encode MP3s are way better now than they were when MP3s were released. Yeah. And I've done multiple tests sitting down with some really good algorithms where it is really hard to tell the difference between the MP3 and the non-MP3 file. And when they're encoded properly, which they often are not, but I don't think that that's naturally a bad thing. I mean, I wouldn't want that as my final copy, but the fact that it allows you to move music around so easy, I think is a really great thing. So I don't necessarily think, I mean, I think high-res audio's, I mean, I love that, the idea of high-res audio, and hope that we move in that direction, but I don't discount the MP3 for what it does. I think it has some great advantages.
Let me ask you a follow-up, because I agree with the advantages of technology and MP3s and the accessibility and all of that stuff. But it seems like now people are listening to music as, like you said, as background, as kind of like mood setting. It'll be the mood for your gym, or the mood for driving your car, mood for the party. Do you think, I mean, are you hopeful, or maybe just do you think there might be something in the future as far as musicians and artistry goes that can like just catch people's attention again, as far as like being able to, like you said, listen to albums, or being a little bit more focused on the music? Because I don't know, I just want to get your point on that.
I don't know if there's hope or not. I don't think most musicians, I think musicians are as guilty of it as all the kids are, and I think a lot of engineers are too. I mean, I was with a group of engineers a few months ago and was complaining about the fact my son doesn't ever listen to a song all the way through. He listens to I mean, that was one great thing about vinyl, is that it forced you to listen to more than a song, because it wasn't easy to get up and switch songs, so you ended up listening to at least the whole side of the record. But I mean, he'll listen, and it's a song he loves. He'll listen to an intro, verse, chorus, bam, next song. It's like, just play a song through. And I was complaining to that with some engineer friends, and several of my engineer friends go, well, what's wrong with that? He wants to, and they're taking his side. Which I was like, well, that's the problem. Engineers feel the same way. They're not going to listen. I mean, damn it, I did this fade at the end of the song. I want somebody to hear it. And that took a good part of our time.
Yeah. That's also another interesting thing, because I don't know if you guys have seen this online video. Vox, there's this online YouTube channel that puts out very interesting videos about the music industry, and they were talking about the fade out on songs, how they used to be really big in the 70s and the 80s, and it kind of like has this feeling of, you know, never ending and like, you know, I guess like hopefulness, and it's kind of like starting to make a resurgence right now. How do you feel about fade outs in songs? Because I kind of started, I felt.
You mean a fade at the end of the song, or a fade out of the?
A fade out like how as production speaking, like when a song fades out, like, you know, on the 70s song where the song would just like fade out forever and have like a really long fade out, but now it seems like it's just a cutout like at a beat. But
Well, I don't like it when it's too long. I think I did early on in my career, the bulk of the stuff I was doing was the contemporary Christian music stuff, and that stuff was getting pretty popular in the mid 90s, and Musician magazine, I remember, did a review of that Wow CCM hits or whatever, one of these compilations that was all the top CCM songs of that year, and their whole and they used to have the best reviews, but the review of the album was, because it was called Wow or something, it was like, wow, Jesus is the Lord of the long fade. That was the review of the album or something, which kind of turned me against long fades. And I always liked those old Elvis Costello records that the fade seemed to take about 2 beats or something, and then it was gone. So, no, I don't know. But I mean, that's just, people change. But I mean, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to listen that long anyway.
yeah, right.
2 questions. What is the hardest thing to track? And for, I guess, just starting a studio, where's some guidelines you thought maybe some non-negotiables?
What's the hardest what?
Thing you've ever tracked?
Like hard how?
I guess like maybe like the most complex or
As far as how many inputs or something?
sure.
I don't know. I don't know if any of it's ever seemed hard. I mean, sometimes it's more complex, so it takes longer to set up or something like that, but I don't know. Nothing's ever felt overly hard. I mean, anything hard, difficult was more based on, it was our 18th hour and the producer wanted to do one more song or something like that, and it was hard to stand up and not fall asleep. But I don't know. I mean, none of it's ever seemed overly difficult from a technical standpoint, although some things take way longer than other things. I mean, the hardest things have been probably repairing some kind of mistake I made along the way or something like that, and those kind of things could be because I did something stupid or whatever, and maybe fixing something that was a mistake that I did. But I mean, it used to be difficult to fly. It's super easy to fly stuff around now in Pro Tools, but when you had an analog machine and something got erased by accident and you had to fly it in from somewhere else, that was not an easy thing always. I mean, you could bring a guy in with a sampler and he would sample it, and then you would have to move it, and he would try to play the sampler back in the right time and you record it and punch it back in. I mean, those were probably the hardest kind of things, were, you know, recovering from some kind of mistake that either myself or somebody else made. Was that the first part of your question or the second?
That was the first. And then the second was just with like starting out with this view, like what are some guidelines that you would, I guess, kind of advise to set, or some non-negotiables?
What? Say it again?
What are some guidelines, I guess, for like having artists in the studio, or like some non-negotiables to set? Because there's, I guess, a lot of people I know that kind of like friends with, but then also like working with people whether it's like a one-time thing or people you know that, I guess you think you could be an asset to you, but like not building a weird relationship where they kind of come to you because of cutting deals or stuff like that.
Because it's a friend or I don't know if I understand. Like some non-negotiables as far as somebody you're working with is that
Either or, just so it's like kind of like a across the board for like everybody.
well, like money, financial things, and
I would say just in general, but I guess just like for, I guess starting out maybe. Because I haven't like, it's kind of an idea I'm still working on, but like I've been in situations where I've been able to help out at different studios, but I've seen like different ways of having like a recording approached and stuff like that in different settings. I don't know if there's like a general approach to.
just in how you work with everybody, or I mean, I don't know what I completely understand what you're saying, but I do know. I mean, anytime I work with somebody, I try to get any kind of business stuff done. I mean, if there's a manager, that's usually who you deal with any of the business stuff with. Or if there's no manager, you deal with the artist. But I don't like to ever do any of that stuff in the studio, because whenever I'm in the studio, I like that the focus to be 100% on being creative and making music. So I know a lot of people, sometimes they're like, well, it'll end up falling into place, or everything will work out, or they're a good person, I'm a good person, I know things will work out. But I've found that anytime you think that way, you spend a good portion of the recording process wondering how it's going to work out, or what's going to be said, or when the best time to approach it is, or when should we talk about this. And if you talk about everything ahead of time, then it's completely out of the way, and there's no curiosity or concern or fright about how it's going to turn out. It's already done, so you can 100% focus everything on the creative process of making a record, which is what I think you need to be doing when you're in the studio. That probably doesn't answer your question, though.
Fills in some gaps.
I have another question.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with, big and small mistakes in your career? Say, because like you were talking about the business venture that you had that had to close down at some point, didn't go anywhere, wasn't profitable. But also as far as like maybe some project coming back to you and there have been some mistake and you having to like assume responsibility, because I've had to deal with a few mistakes, and it's sometimes nerve-wracking and not easy to deal with, sometimes.
Well, I don't know if there's a general rule of thumb.
What's been your experience with that?
I mean, anytime I work on something, I don't care whether I'm getting paid full rate or it's something I'm doing for a lower price. I mean, I try to put the same concern and passion and care into everything I do, because if it's going to have my name on it, it could be potentially what gets me more work in the future or keeps me from ever working again. So I mean, I try to be as careful as I can that things don't get out the door. I mean, I think you don't want to make excuses if there's you want to admit to your mistakes if you've made a mistake, but I mean, some mistakes can't be fixed, I mean, I remember the first time I went to Gateway Mastering. Bob Ludwig was mastering a record I did, and it's mixed. I mean, he's mastering, and I mean, this is something that was done on an analog console, that it's not like you could call your assistant and have him open up Pro Tools and make a couple of changes. And I remember sitting down there all excited about hearing this in possibly sonically the best room I've ever been in, and immediately hearing a gate on a guitar that had been gating out some noise or something on a guitar. I could hear the guitar close, the guitar gate close at one point, and the noise just shut out. And I'm about to pass out. I'm like, what in the world? I just heard a gate, and Bob goes, yeah, you'll hear a lot of things here. You won't hear anything else. That's real subtle. You don't need to worry about it. You'll never hear it outside of this room, or something like that. Well, right, but it was a pretty crazy thing, because I mean, I heard there were multiple things on that I realized. I mean, that I heard that I didn't, and I didn't hear them again when I got the thing back. It was just in that room. There was some obvious stuff that made me pretty insecure about my work. But I mean, I've had a few pan things or some. I mean, I've had stuff. I mean, I did a record once on a song. It was a console problem, but the left side of, I mean, thank goodness it wasn't the primary reverb, but the left side of one of the reverbs didn't print. It somehow, I mean, it had been there at one point, but there was we found out later there had been a short in the console, but it was an analog console, and we were already on to a whole other song, and it would have been, you know, half a day work to recall it and everything else, and it was I can't remember, it was something, it was on horns or something like that, and it was something to where, I mean, I don't remember, I think I may have just told the producer and we never got told to the artist, but I remember having a discussion about it, saying, well, this is something, I mean, based on panning and stuff, it was a decision. I mean, I would not have decided to do that, but somebody could have decided to do that. It was not 100% wrong, so it was like, we went with it. I don't know if anybody ever noticed.
The Russ Long technique, the cross pan.
Yeah, Russ always says that thing with that reverb, just one side of the reverb. Oh, man. Yeah.
This being a question towards artists and bands that you've worked with, how have you dealt with lack of preparation as a recording engineer with a band that comes in and is on the time, is on the money, is on the clock? You know, I know because sometimes some people ask, some recording engineers ask the band to be prepared and to come in and do your thing like how you're supposed to do it, but sometimes that's not the case. How have you dealt, or how do you deal with those situations?
Well,
if you do.
I mean, if I'm producing, I mean, if I'm just engineering, they've got the day they paid for, and that's it. So that we get what we get, you know. I mean, if we know what we want, I'll help push it along. But if I'm producing a band, I know what we can get in a day, because it's not the first time I've heard them play. I mean, I've been to rehearsals and I've heard work tapes, and I'm aware of what they can and can't do. And I would never get us in a situation where we're potentially gonna, we're gonna lose or turn out. I mean, the initial couple of days of tracking, not just sonically, but are very critical from an emotional and self-security standpoint. I mean, for the band, if they feel like, man, we nailed it, we got out of here, we got done at half a day early or whatever, then it sets up a great precedent for it to be a very positive recording experience and everybody to work real well together. Where if you're going in to track 6 songs and you only get 5 done, then that's not just a damper for that day. That can really create a bad vibe for the entire project. So I would always go into my initial tracking with way more than enough time to get what we need done, and I'm not going to waste the time. If we get all the tracking done, then we're going to work on some guitar overdubs, or we're going to work on some vocals or something like that. So we'll be able to use the time. But especially when I work with, you know, indie bands and things like that, we usually go to a nicer studio. I mean, I recorded Ocean Way B a lot for tracking things, because that it's such a great experience, and everybody feels like a king. They go in there, and it's like sets a great precedent for the project. And then even if you're in a cheap place for the rest of the 2 weeks or whatever, they're still riding on that high of their first couple of days of tracking, and they feel like, man, we got it done in the first day. That second day we ended up just doing overdubs, and everybody's feeling great, and it just sets a great precedent for a great creative experience from that point on. And that's how I like to work anyway. So if you're an engineer, there's nothing you can do about it. But that would never happen to me as a producer, just because I know exactly what the band's capable of and everything when I'm going into the session.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So obviously now, like you talked about, it's a lot easier for somebody who's not an engineer, somebody who's not a true this or that, to get good sounds, and it's a lot easier because of technology. If you were starting from scratch, like you had no gear as of right now, and you were starting in 2017, do you still think it matters, like, to invest more of your money? Say you have X amount of money to invest in getting great sounds from the source, or do you think you would invest more in getting like an okay source and investing more in like plugins and things to do things on the back end? Because there's obviously a lot of plugins that do really powerful things now, but do you still think there's something to be said in that people care enough in smaller situations about getting really great sounds and investing in like some really great pre's versus, you know, having a lot of options and with plugins? So it's basically a matter of get really good sounds from the source and not be as versatile and doing things on the back end, or being more versatile.
Well, I mean, there's probably some exceptions, but in general, I would say you really should have a good path, a good stereo path to where, I mean, if you're wanting to be an engineer and make money as an engineer, if you've got a couple of great pre's and a couple of great compressors to where you can record something that sounds, and I don't mean crazy expensive, but something to where, because what happens is if say there's a producer and he is doing vocals in some terrible studio, and he brings one engineer in one day. He's got 2 days to do it. One engineer's in one day, and then you're in the second day, and the first engineer guy is using what the studio has, and it's not very good. And then you bring in your great pre's, and it sounds great. Well, and then it goes to somebody else to mix. The producer's not going to remember that you brought in gear or didn't bring in gear or whatever, but he's going to remember that when the mix guy says, man, I don't know what you got going here, but this thing sounds way better than this one does. Who did this one? He's going to say, you did that one, and you cut the tracks that sound great. So you're always, if you have a couple of great paths, then you can always assure that regardless of the situation, regardless of how good the studio is, your stuff's always going to sound good. And that's what you want to make sure if you're engineering, is that every time you record something, it sounds great.
Do you feel the same even if you're primarily, cutting like instruments on people's music and or doing more producing type stuff? Do you feel the same way?
Well, I don't know if anybody needs, you can get carried away because I don't know. I mean, it's great to have 20 pre's and have a bunch of different colors and a bunch of options and all that kind of thing, but I don't think you need that. But I think it's great I think you always want to record great. I mean, maybe you don't need the compressors. Maybe you just need 2 great pre's, because you can do great compression and great everything else in the box, but the pre's happen before, and I think that's a big factor, is making sure you go through great pre's. I mean, if I was just getting started, I would buy a decent and okay vocal mic that would also work well on acoustic guitars and all that kind of stuff, because some studios don't have that, and I'd have 2 great pre's. So whether I'm recording a stereo acoustic guitar or one electric guitar or one vocal or a stereo piano, I could always make sure I had 2 great pre's. And that's what I would do. I mean, I would feel better about that than plugins initially.
Well, I think we could lob questions at you all night, but a man has to sleep at some point.
What time is it? It's 10 o'clock.
10, yeah.
Well, one more. Anybody got any more?
Yeah.
Okay, no more.
That was such a strong question. Yeah.
Hopefully I answered it right.
Well, I guess lastly, you do mixing, you do production, you do engineering. If one of us wanted to hire you to do a thing with a project we're working on, who do we call? How do we get in touch?
You can email me at russlong@me.com, or you can call me at 615-400-RUSS. And
Are you serious?
That's true.
That's amazing.
And if I like the music, I don't care how little money you have, we'll figure out a way to make it work, because I like to work on stuff I like. But we might have to schedule it. It might have to take me 3 months to get done.
That's amazing. Cool. Russ, thanks so much for coming and doing this.
Thanks for having
me. Thanks for spending some time with us here on YouTube. If you'd like to take us with you, search for Music City Listeners on your favorite podcasting platform.